My husband looked me dead in the eye and said, "Security will escort you out. Your services are no longer needed here." The entire boardroom, 200 employees, executives, and board members, watched in stunned silence as the CEO of our billion-dollar company fired his own wife to make room for his 25-year-old mistress. I'm 45 years old, and I just watched my husband of 20 years destroy me publicly in the most humiliating way possible. But here's what nobody in that room knew. While he was busy playing the powerful CEO, I had been quietly, methodically, and legally transferring every single share of our company into my name through an offshore holding structure I'd built over 2 decades. The look of smug satisfaction on his face as security approached my chair was priceless. The look of absolute terror when my lawyers walked into his office the next morning. Even better. Because you see, he didn't just fire an employee that day. He fired the actual owner of everything he thought was his. This is the story of how I let my husband believe he was the king of his castle, while I was secretly building the foundation that would bring it all crashing down on him. And trust me, the revenge was so much sweeter than I ever imagined. My name is Sarah, and for the past 20 years, I've been living what everyone thought was the perfect corporate power couple life. My husband David and I built what became a $2.8 billion tech consulting firm from the ground up, starting in our garage back in 2003 when I was 25 and he was 28. But here's the thing nobody knew. While David was the face of the company, giving interviews and accepting awards, I was the brain behind every major decision, every strategic move, every breakthrough that made us successful. I have an MBA from Wharton and a background in corporate finance that David never bothered to mention in his speeches. To the outside world, I was just the supportive wife who showed up to company events in designer dresses, smiling and nodding while he took all the credit. Our marriage started as a genuine partnership. We were both ambitious, both driven, both willing to sacrifice everything for success. I remember those early days when we'd work 18-hour days side by side, surviving on coffee and takeout, dreaming about the empire we'd build together. I handled all the financial structuring, investor relations, and strategic planning, while David focused on sales and public relations. He was charismatic and charming, perfect for the front-facing role. I was analytical and detail-oriented, perfect for making sure we actually made money. We lived in a Ford Taurus, $2 million house in the hills, drove matching Teslas, and took exotic vacations 4 times a year. From the outside, we had everything. But somewhere along the way, David started believing his own press. He began to see himself as the sole genius behind our success, and I became just another accessory in his carefully curated life. I never minded staying in the background. In fact, I preferred it. While David was busy being the celebrity CEO, I was quietly building something much more valuable. Complete legal ownership of everything we'd created. You see, I'm not just smart, I'm patient. And I learned a long time ago that the person who controls the money controls everything. Our relationship had become more business partnership than marriage years ago. We slept in separate bedrooms, barely spoke unless it was about work, and hadn't been intimate in over 3 years. But I stayed because I was building something bigger than just a marriage. I was building security, power, and the ultimate insurance policy. But everything started to change when David hired Jessica Martinez as our new director of marketing 6 months ago. Jessica was 25, fresh out of Stanford with an MBA, and exactly the type of ambitious young woman I used to be. She was brilliant, I'll give her that. But she was also hungry for power in a way that made my skin crawl. I noticed the way David's eyes lingered on her during meetings, the way he suddenly started caring about his appearance again, hitting the gym at 5 a.m. and buying expensive cologne, the way he'd find excuses to work late when I knew Jessica was still in the office. But I'm not some naive wife who confronts her husband about suspicious behavior. I'm a strategist. So I watched, I documented, and I planned. David had always been a narcissist, but Jessica fed his ego in ways I'd stopped doing years ago. She laughed at his jokes, asked for his advice on everything, and made him feel like the brilliant mentor he'd always wanted to be. Meanwhile, I was the wife who knew exactly how much of our success was actually my doing, and David resented me for it. The first red flag came during our quarterly board meeting in March. David presented a new marketing strategy that I immediately recognized as flawed. It would cost us millions and alienate our core client base. When I raised my concerns privately after the meeting, David snapped at me in a way he'd never done before. "Sarah, you need to stay in your lane," he said, his voice cold and dismissive. "Marketing isn't your department. That's why we hired Jessica. She actually understands this generation of consumers." I felt something shift inside me that day. After 20 years of partnership, he was telling me to stay in my lane in the company I'd helped build from nothing. That night, I made a decision that would change everything. I called my personal attorney, not our company lawyer, but my own private counsel I'd kept on retainer for years, and told him it was time to accelerate our timeline. You see, I'd been slowly and legally transferring company assets for years, but always carefully, always under the radar. Now it was time to move faster. Over the next 3 months, I watched my marriage and my professional respect disintegrate while I secretly orchestrated the most satisfying revenge plot of my life. David became increasingly bold about his affair with Jessica, thinking I was too naive or too dependent to do anything about it. They started taking business trips together, weekend conferences that somehow required both the CEO and the marketing director to attend. David would come home from these trips energized and happy in a way he hadn't been with me in years. Meanwhile, I was documenting every expense, every hotel booking, every dinner charged to the company card. The breaking point came during our annual company retreat in July. David had organized a weekend at a luxury resort in Napa Valley for our top 50 employees. I watched him and Jessica flirt openly at the dinner table, saw the way she touched his arm when she laughed, noticed how they disappeared together during the evening cocktail hour. But the moment that sealed his fate happened on Saturday night. I was walking back to my room around 11 p.m. when I heard voices coming from the conference room. The door was slightly ajar, and I could see David and Jessica inside, clearly having had too much wine. "Sarah has no idea what she's talking about half the time," David was saying, his voice slurred and arrogant. "She thinks because she has an MBA, she understands business, but she's never had to actually sell anything or manage real people. She's been riding my coattails for 20 years. Jessica laughed, a sound that made my blood boil. "It must be so frustrating having to pretend she's an equal partner when everyone knows you're the real genius behind the company." "The truth is," David continued, "I've been thinking about making some changes. Sarah's been comfortable in her little executive assistant role for too long. Maybe it's time for some fresh blood in leadership." I stood there in the hallway, my heart pounding, as my husband of 20 years discussed replacing me with his mistress, like I was a piece of outdated office equipment. That night, I called my lawyer and told him to expedite everything. It was time to remind David exactly who owned what. The next month was a masterclass in strategic patience. I smiled and played the oblivious wife, while secretly meeting with lawyers, accountants, and forensic auditors. Every document David signed, every decision he made, I was 3 steps ahead. The moment of truth came on September 15th, during our quarterly all-hands meeting. David had called the entire company together, all 200 employees, every department head, the full board of directors. He said he had important organizational announcements to make. I sat in the front row, wearing my best poker face, as David took the stage with Jessica standing proudly beside him. My heart was racing, but not from fear, from anticipation. "Today marks a new chapter for our company," David began, his voice full of false confidence. "We're restructuring our leadership team to better reflect our innovative vision and dynamic growth strategy." He went on for 10 minutes about fresh perspectives and new energy before finally getting to the point. Effective immediately, Jessica Martinez will be taking over as our new Chief Operating Officer, overseeing all strategic operations and financial planning. The room was dead silent. Everyone knew what this meant. Jessica was taking my job, but David wasn't finished. He looked directly at me, his eyes cold and calculating, and delivered the blow he thought would destroy me. Sarah, your services are no longer needed in this company. Security will escort you out immediately. Please clean out your office and return all company property. The gasps from the audience were audible. Jessica stood there with a barely concealed smirk, thinking she'd won the ultimate prize. David looked triumphant, like he'd just conquered his biggest obstacle. I stood up slowly, smoothed my skirt, and smiled. Actually, David, there's something I need to tell you first. I pulled out my phone and called my lawyer, putting him on speaker for the entire room to hear. Mr. Harrison, please confirm for everyone here, who is the legal owner of 78% of this company's shares? That would be you, Mrs. Sarah Chen, through your holding company Chen Enterprises, which you established in 2004. The color drained from David's face. Jessica's smirk disappeared instantly. And Mr. Harrison, as the majority shareholder, do I have the authority to terminate employees, including the CEO? Yes, ma'am. You have full authority over all personnel decisions. I looked David dead in the eye and said the words I'd been rehearsing for months. David, you're fired. Security will escort you out. Your services are no longer needed here. The aftermath was immediate and devastating for David. The room erupted in chaos as 200 employees tried to process what had just happened. Jessica stood frozen in shock, realizing that her promotion had just evaporated along with her sugar daddy's power. Within hours, my legal team had taken control of all company assets, bank accounts, and operations. David's company credit cards were cancelled, his access to all systems was revoked, and security literally escorted him out of the building he thought he owned. But the real plot twist came 3 days later when my forensic accountants finished their investigation. David hadn't just been having an affair. He'd been embezzling company funds to finance his lifestyle with Jessica. Expensive jewelry, luxury hotel suites, even a down payment on a condo he'd bought for her. All paid for with money that was legally mine. The confrontation in my, now officially my, office was everything I dreamed it would be. David came crawling back, not as the arrogant CEO, but as a desperate man facing potential criminal charges. Sarah, please, he begged, his voice breaking. I made a mistake. I was stupid. I was selfish. But we can work this out. We built this together. For the first time in months, I saw genuine remorse in his eyes. Not just fear of consequences, but actual understanding of what he'd lost. You're right, I said calmly. We did build this together. But you forgot that part when you decided I was expendable. Jessica had already been terminated and was facing her own legal issues as an accessory to the embezzlement. The woman who thought she was going to be the new queen of our empire was now unemployed and potentially facing jail time. David's transformation was complete when he finally understood the scope of what I'd built while he was playing CEO. You've been planning this for years, he whispered, the reality hitting him. 20 years, I confirmed. Every contract you signed, every decision you made, I was protecting myself and this company from exactly this moment. You taught me that the only person you can truly trust is yourself. The man who had humiliated me in front of 200 people was now sitting in my office, crying, begging for mercy from the woman he'd tried to discard. 6 months later, I'm writing this from my corner office, the same office David used to occupy, as the official CEO of what is now called Chen Enterprises. The company is thriving under my leadership. Our stock price has increased by 40%, and we've landed 3 major contracts that David's ego-driven approach had cost us. David pled guilty to embezzlement and received 2 years of probation and community service. He was also ordered to pay back every penny he stole, plus interest. He's now working as a mid-level sales manager at a competitor, making about 1/10 of what he used to earn. Jessica moved back in with her parents and is working at a small marketing firm in another state. But here's what I learned from this experience. The most powerful revenge isn't emotional, it's strategic. For 20 years, I played the long game while David played the short game. He focused on image and ego. I focused on substance and security. He thought power came from being seen. I knew it came from being prepared. The woman who was escorted out of that boardroom 6 months ago was playing a role. The real me, the one who built financial empires while others built facades, was always in control. I just let David think otherwise until it was time to remind him who really held the power. To anyone reading this who feels underestimated, overlooked, or taken for granted, document everything, protect yourself legally, and never let anyone convince you that your contributions don't matter. Sometimes the best revenge is simply revealing the truth about who really built what. The most satisfying part? David still doesn't fully understand how I did it. He still thinks I got lucky or that my lawyers found some loophole. He can't comprehend that his supportive wife was actually a strategic mastermind who spent 2 decades building an empire while he was busy taking credit for it. What's your story? Have you ever been underestimated by someone who thought they held all the power? Share your experiences in the comments. I'd love to hear how you proved them wrong.